hip-hop. Now playing hip-hop.
Let's be real about unreal.
My name is Abby, and I'm here today to talk about how hard it is to live with people who tell you exactly how they want you to be, not how you want to be. They won't give you personal space or even listen to what you want to say. But what is even more difficult is standing against them in an attempt to stop them from interfering with your life. It takes a lot of guts, especially if those people are your own family members. I have been trying all my life to impress my grandmother, but I have never been good enough for her. She's always hated me, despite all my desperate attempts to please her, and the reason is anything but simple. My grandmother is a very lovable lady. She comes from a religious Catholic family. She thought that I would never be a classy lady in the future if I kept on wearing boys' clothes. It didn't stop at the way I dressed. I've always received unwelcoming comments from her about my actions. Don't eat so fast. Stop making sounds while you are eating. Don't run. Brush your hair. Remove your hat. Lift up your pinky while drinking tea. I mean, for God's sake. When I grew up, I could no longer put up with her excessive interference in my actions and appearance. I have my own style and personal look, and I don't like to wear any kind of makeup. I like wearing baggy pants and Nike sneakers, and I definitely don't like wearing the dresses she always bought for me. Last Christmas, my grandma insisted that I should wear a pink dress. Yes, as you imagine, it was hell. However, I have always felt some sort of freedom when I was with my friends. I used to spend the biggest part of my day with them after school, as they more or less understood my interests better than my family did. One day, we were deciding to attend the opening of a new ice rink in town, which was going to take place on a Sunday. I had never missed a Sunday in church all my life. Not because I was extremely religious or anything, but rather I wanted to avoid my grandmother's rage. It is true that I love Jesus a lot, but I also knew that he wouldn't send me to hell because I went to the ice rink instead of the church one time. And that was it. I went to the ice rink opening day, and it was a perfect day. I even met a girl named Dana there, to whom I felt an undeniable attraction, and it seemed that the feeling was mutual. I took her number so we could talk again. I thought that we might go out for dinner or something like that. Who knew? But that perfect day didn't stay perfect for long. Once I returned home, I was greeted with a rough and near endless lecture about not being committed to going to church, followed by the usual unasked-for remarks about the way I dressed and looked, and how the way I looked wasn't ladylike. But what really got on my nerves was that my mother was sitting right there, listening to my grandmother's lecture without saying a word. My mother had never made any remarks regarding the way I'd lived my life, but she had never backed me up either. I waited for my grandmother to finish her yelling session and then turned around to go to my room. But she grabbed me by the arm and yanked it vigorously, saying, "You're a cursed girl." I went on my way, thinking about all that had happened and how my grandmother had single-handedly ruined my whole day. I sat in bed and started texting with Dana. Despite that we hadn't met before that day, she could feel that I wasn't okay. There was an enormous chemistry between us. Talking to her was so much fun. She definitely made things a lot better for me. After that day, I started to talk to her on a daily basis. We met up a couple of times and things evolved between us, and I found myself confessing my love to her. And that was it. We were a couple. One day I invited Dana over for dinner at my home. We sat at the dinner table. Dana looked very polite and well-behaved. My grandmother watched how Dana was eating slowly, and she had that pleased smile on her face. Everything was beyond perfect, until my grandmother started asking questions. Grandma asked her which church she went to. Dana answered that she didn't follow any church, and that she didn't come from a religious family. Grandma sat straight up in her seat and looked displeased with what she had heard. I had to cut in, as I knew how that conversation was going to end. And that was something I didn't really want happening. I said, "So, there is something that Dana and I wanted you to know. We have been dating for 6 months now." Suddenly, everyone fell silent. My grandmother stared daggers at me. Her facial expressions were screaming louder than anything I had ever heard before. She jumped up out of her chair so violently that it fell backward, and my mother couldn't say one word. She followed my grandmother. I'd honestly expected some kind of reaction, but I didn't expect it to be over the top like that. I remember it was a few years ago When I talked to Mom about my sexuality at the time, that day, Mom only told me one thing. She said, when you grow up, you will be free to choose. But until then, you shouldn't mention this in front of anyone, especially your grandmother. Dana felt that she had to leave, as maybe her presence at that moment was not the best thing. I walked her to the door and returned. The yelling of my mother and grandmother filled the house. But there was a specific moment after when silence fell for the rest of the night. At that moment, I heard something that shook my whole body. My legs couldn't carry me anymore. What I heard had the power to turn my life upside down. My grandmother suddenly stopped yelling and approached my mother. She didn't know I was standing behind the door, and I could hear everything that was being said. She said to her, "That daughter of yours is cursed. She doesn't deserve to be blessed with the grace of family. You have to throw her out of here." And my mother answered in a broken voice, "Okay, I will. Am I cursed just because I tried to live my life the way I chose to live it? I don't even look like the cursed that she used to talk about in church. Where would I go now?" Everything around me started falling apart. My mother was scared to death of my grandmother, and my father wasn't there for me either. He was on one of his work trips. I immediately called Dana. I told her everything that had happened since the moment she'd left my place. She tried to calm me down and asked me to pack anything that I could and to come to spend the week with her at her house. And that was exactly what I did. I waited until my mother and grandmother went to their rooms, and then I snuck out of the house without anyone noticing. I went to Dana's house. She had told her parents everything before I came over. Her parents were very understanding and kind as well. I didn't feel like a stranger when I was with them, unlike how I used to feel back home. I spent the night at her place without anyone noticing that I was gone. But things rarely work as planned. In the morning, my grandmother noticed my absence, and she knew exactly where I likely was. But what she did afterward was very disgraceful. My grandmother called the police to report that Dana's family was hiding me from my own. I couldn't believe she did such a thing. The police came to Dana's house to investigate my grandmother's claim, but fortunately they didn't find me there. And when they asked about me, Dana's mother told them what had really happened, very calmly and in detail. She told them that I was very scared and confused, and that was the reason why I'd come to spend the night at my friend's house, and that was all. She told them that there was no kidnapping or anything of the sort, like my grandmother said there was, and that I was at school then, so the police went back to my home. I didn't understand why my grandmother would want to throw me out of the house in one moment and to bring me back home by force the next. When I returned home, my father was back from his latest business trip, and he knew about everything that had happened from my mother, and he didn't like any of my grandmother's actions toward me at all. At the time, he didn't understand why I had to run away from home. I screamed at them all. "I ran away because you're the ones that don't want me here. You always try to change me. You always disapprove of how I look, how I act. You even disapprove of my girlfriend. I ran away before you could throw me out yourselves. Yes, Grandma, I heard you plotting to get rid of me, and the curse that I hold, and throw me out of the family home." I couldn't bear it anymore, and I broke into tears. It was then that my dad asked my mother and grandmother to leave us alone, as he had something to tell me. What he told me made me understand everything. He told me that when Grandma was young, she was raised in a very religious family that forced her to follow the teachings of Christianity, and to even commit herself to the Christian choir, and that to this day she was still committed to that. But her family forcing her to commit was the only way to get what they called the curse out of her. The curse that was passed from my grandmother to me was that she was also homosexual. When her parents found out the truth about her sexual preference, they never accepted her. Their reactions were cruel and unbearable to her, and they told her every day that what she felt was anything but normal for a person who loves God. They told her that what she had was nothing but a feeling instilled in her by the devil. So she grew up having a real complex towards her own homosexuality, and she had always been scared of facing the same experience that she had faced before. And regarding what she said about throwing me out of the house, Dad said that she always overreacts towards everything, and that she wasn't really going to follow through on it. Now I understand why my grandmother really wanted me to change. But that was not reason enough for me to pretend that I was someone other than the person I am today. My relationship with my grandmother is still strained. But for me, I decided that once I turn 18, I will move in with Dana. Until then, I only have to bear with Grandma and not try to change her. What do you think of my story? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments, and don't forget to